Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jonathan Burgess, and I'm here to testify on behalf of the entire Burgess family, but all the pioneers that came to Gold Country and were in California throughout the year 1849 and beyond. I'm fifth generation Californian. The search, I'll start by saying this, is that I've been in search of truthful history for over 50 years, and it started with my mother. And it reignited itself about 4 years ago when my twin brother and I were approached, better known as the Burgess Brothers, to help save the Emmanuel Church in Coloma, California, where gold was discovered. My mother had passed on, our mother had passed on, and we remembered there being remnants of the ownership of an African church. Her mom said, your great-grandfather owned a church. And as we're going through this research and trying to save this church, we found a lot of information. And before I even go into the information, I just want to say this and back up a little bit. The last 48 hours, the last 72 hours have been horrendous. I'm going to try and do my best to cover over 100 years, of our family being here, 172 years in 10 minutes. So I hope that there are questions afterwards. But I'll say in the last 48 hours, I've been accused of pinning history for my personal gain publicly. I've been accused of doing this just for personal wealth. I'm doing this for every descendant of slavery in this state of California, because it's specific to California. I don't know any different. And so I'll say this, I'm in seeking truth. And to Dr. Brown's point, because he makes it all the time, is that we've been led untruthful information. I just want truthful history. So that being said, in search of, I'm going to go back and tell you about my mother. I remember as a child going up to Coloma with my Uncle Marion, who was the oldest of the three brothers. They call them the Burgess boys in books that are written today, even though they were grown men. My Uncle Marion, by the time I was old enough to go to Coloma, he could just point and cry. And it wasn't until recently that I realized what those tears represented. In the last 72 hours, thanks to the Department of Justice, I was informed that, yes, laws were actually passed through the legislation to allow the governor, well, not the governor, the attorney general and legislators to condemn property and not pay families. I was also made aware of that my grandfather and his two brothers, my Uncle Marion, were threatened to be prosecuted by the same state that's supposed to be free in the event they didn't sell their land. And what I know now from seeking all this truth is that the land was all that we had left. We had farmland, lots of it, because our time in Coloma started in 1849 when my great-great-grandfather was brought to California. Picture sits there behind me. His name was Rufus Burgess. That hung over our fireplace for years. My mother always told me, my father, that's your great-grandfather. He was one of the first pioneers to actually arrive in the town of Coloma. And my dad documents he was there when gold was discovered. Censored records show Rufus Burgess in El Dorado County in 1849. And if you look at Miss Beasley's book, Delilah Beasley, he's the only African-American man listed in the town of Coloma in 1849. And he established a lot, orchards, farmland, even the African church, which no one seems to know about today, although there are records and it was clearly documented. The family holds deeds today. As far as I'm concerned, that African church is the Emmanuel Church, and it's surrounded by orchards, which again, people, parts of institutions, don't want that to come true. So not only did it establish all that, like most early gold miners that came here, they worked and got their freedom. Thanks to Marilyn Demas, she was a true historian and a truth seeker. Tina Alexander has been extremely helpful as well in some of the state parks. But thanks to them, I found that not only was he brought here, he was sold once he was here. See, I struggle with the problem or the issue of knowing that this man behind me was listed as my great-grandfather, but yet we had his Bible, something that families keep for years. And inside his Bible was an autobiography. I didn't understand why, and I questioned my mom. Mom, why does he have the name Nelson? That's Rufus Burgess. And thanks to him, and he tells you his life, he could read and write. He left us a map, a gold mine. But these stories have been unacknowledged by the state of California. It wasn't until my adulthood and my own research that I was able to piece together how, in fact, he became Nelson Bell. And I question, as I'm doing the research, and these 4 years of research, going through the state parks, working with the institutions, and I don't blame the institutions because at the end of the day, California is an institution. And the institutions never worked for us, Black people in America, Black people in California. So how can I expect those people that work for the institution to help me? I'm hoping that you guys do that. But in discovering the Marshall Gold discovery, as I'm doing research, the binder, there's a white binder that was there. My mother wrote letters. She wrote letters back in the 70s, 80s, 90s about our family, so the park knew about it. Nelson Bell, who's Rufus Burgess, was on the first map of 1857, but sadly, when you go to the park today, there's no mention of any existence of his house or him. In fact, the Burgess family, who established a lot, was part of the Colored Citizens Convention. My great-grandfather actually is listed as a secretary-treasurer in the church building in 1862. I couldn't understand why reverends and pastors around the nation weren't outraged that when you go to the gold discovery site, there's no mention. There's a Chinese church or building. There's a Methodist church or building. And there is also a Catholic church or building. And documents will share, I care not to get into them now, that the Methodist church actually became the African church. But people don't want to believe that. So I ask myself these questions. Question, why state park officials or the institutions, the California institutions, and not the people in the parks, because they work there and understand it. They make little to no mention of the pioneer Burgess family when so much was established, and yet there's legislation showing the land that was condemned. I asked why the home of Nelson Bell, who was actually listed as the only Black man, the mulatto in the town, is not talked about. In fact, my last visit at the church, I asked them, what park officials, I asked when they were going to tell me how they wanted to talk about the site of gold discovery. I asked them, why don't we talk about what we know? Why is the home of Nelson Bell not listed on the map? I can go to the park today. Do you know what it would make little Black kids feel like to go and see and know that something was established? See, our institutions have not only hurt the direct descendants, it's hurt others from fabricated stories. There's something that says dead people don't tell tales. You're right, they don't. They can't lie. They can't make up anymore. And all I want is the truth. That's all I wanted. But I found it. And I hope that you guys ask questions. Frequently in visiting the park, my brother and I were asked once they found out we're Burgess, what do you know about the land on the north side of the hill? What am I supposed to know about the land on the north side of the hill? I don't know. I know that our family was in the town from 1849 until they were forced out of the town. And yet on the first township map of Coloma, there's not one African American listed. In fact, I know that Nelson Bell, well, he went back to using the name Rufus at some point, but he was buried under a slave named Nelson Bell. I know in my own research that Dr. Berry mentioned that there were a number of people in El Dorado. I know that there were colored citizens that were sending money to fund the convention from their gold digging. And I know there was a preaching point in El Dorado County. Reverend Jennifer was actually appointed for 6 preaching points, with Coloma being a stop. That's more than 100 people. In fact, there's documents of a couple hundred people being inside the church. There's a 2006 document that the State of California Parks Division knew of the existence of the building, but requested the late Marilyn Demas to not reveal the site for fear of vandalism. And yet when I go there today, I'm told there was an African church that our family once owned. See, maps are a figment of imaginations. The worst thing I'd say is that, our historic home that had been in the family since the early 1860s was razed in 1950 by state employees. Nobody seems to know where that home was. Just recently, I was given a document, thanks to DOJ, of what they believe is the Burgess home. And I questioned where that actual home was, because my mother wrote documents, and I know from records and deeds that we own multiple homes now. But yet the property was condemned, for which you could pay nothing for it. And although all of our property, there was only one parcel of property that my great-grandmother Josephine sold, and she sold it to Mr. Gallagher, who actually came after the gold rush. She sold the property in 1901, but Gallagher, I think, arrived in 1860. Now, I've reached out to Assemblymember Gallagher because I know there's some correlation and relation, but silence is complacency. I don't know the reality behind it, but I do know that there was a bunch of land behind the blacksmith range hall. And in books I've seen is that Melvin Gallagher Ranch. Melvin Gallagher was born the same time my grandfather was, and we had been in the town already at least 10, 15, 20 years and established a great deal. I'll say this. Our family has endured a lot. And not only our family from the falsities of what California's done, other families have endured it too. When I say other families, it's not anyone's fault that people were made to be something that they're not. In fact, I'd be embarrassed if I knew that my direct descendant had did things that have been done to us. And there may be a call, and I hate to say it, but there may be a call for reparations for that too, because it was the institution that actually put these people up to be on pedestals and didn't tell the true history. And yet they suppressed our history. And so I would ask that this task force and this council, I was asked to put together some things of what reparations looks like. Well, my family's been without land, been forced off of land. And it was farmland. There are documents of actually farming, sending fruit throughout the Valley of Coloma, El Dorado, and Placer counties. I'd ask that the land that we know, which I believe Nelson Bell, his home, I believe to be where the California State Library, Marshall Discovery Library is sitting on that property. And now when I go to state parks or prisons, I look at properties different. What I've learned is that the tactics that were used here were used all over the place. I'd ask to put together a short list of what reparation would look like, and I'll say something real quick. The institutions, I've got a list. The institutions were, in fact, responsible. The state of California is one of them. Our family doesn't need to have any more loss. I've lost both my parents, 2 daughters to COVID, and I've got contracted it myself. I want immediate restitution. I've got a brother that's been sitting behind institutional bars for the last 27 years for a murder he didn't commit, but yet the institution's here. And so I would ask the governor, an executive order, the same way, that an order was just about done to kick my grandfather and his brothers off of their land, to do the same for the Burgess family. And that comes with reinstoring property that was taken, wrongfully taken. And for the people up there that are sitting on the property today that own it, it's not your fault. And I'd say this, I don't want to kick you off. That's why reparations is due too. Because you had no idea that when the maps were there in 1872 or whenever they were placed and this reconstruction occurred, what you were getting into. And if you did, can't say that I wouldn't have taken advantage of it too, but you've maintained the property this long. But for any state building, any state park, any state institution, those properties should be returned to actual owners and leases enacted for 200 years, and they pay all the back pay with restitution. That would be fine for the Burgess family and any other family that's proven whose land was wrongfully taken through legislative practices that discriminated against descendants of slaves in California. My name's Jonathan Burgess, and I'll rest the mic and be open for any questions. Thank you.